in the programme as a plenary panel session. And it's hopefully our idea is to sort of bring the thoughts that have been bubbling around over the last 2 days together in some way. We don't know what that's going to look like or what people might think or say, but that's part of the sort of emergent process of the conference itself. And in order to facilitate this, we have our 4 key speakers as well, who will be asking to respond to some of your thoughts. But first of all, we wondered if it would be to bring it back to the 3 themes that are of our interest. So we're naming our own interests here. They may not be the same as your interests, but in the sheet that everybody received before the conference began, on things that we have been tussling with in our ideas about thinking how to approach the possibility of beginning to decolonize teacher education. And if we're talking about decolonizing teacher education, we're by default talking about decolonizing education. And we put together a position paper where we identified 3 key headings. The first of which was if we think about teaching and education as an ethical venture, then how is it possible to be ethical or to speak ethics in a way that is non-normative? So ethics themselves are based on sets of norms. But if they're based on a set of norms, then those norms then can lead to the speaking with hubris, i.e. that some people have an authority. Those norms are the ones that hold authority over other norms, and so on and so forth. So we have the theme of ethics is normative, norms are hubristic, and if they are hubristic, i.e. authoritative or arrogant in some way, then are they also colonizing? And how then can one speak in a way that is decolonizing, that is empowering rather than hubristic? So we have around the room 3 flip chart boards where we have those 3 headings. Ethics as normativity over there, norms as hubris here, and speaking as empowering at the back right-hand side over there. And you will notice that we have put a colour by each one. Yellow for yellow post-its, orange for orange post-its, and red for pink red for red post-its at the back. And we would like to invite you for 10 minutes to have a natter with each other about these 3 things, and then if you choose to write something that relates to, or the way in which you relate to, either or all of those 3 headings, choosing a colour post-it that matches the thing that you want to stick something against. Does that make sense? You don't have to do it as a group, you can do it as an individual, you can talk about it with somebody, you can sit in personal silent reflection, however you choose to do that. And because we are also researching this, we don't want to include or exclude anybody from taking part in this activity, but if you are somebody who is offering consent for your information to be used as part of the research, would you mind, please, just putting your name on the back of your post-it before you stick it up, so people aren't going to be seeing who said what, but then when we collect the post-its in, we'll know which ones we can use as part of the research and which ones we won't. Does that sound okay? Okay. And there are also those, we're talking about these, but the reflective sheets, so you may want to, as part of this, also put some personal reflections on those reflective sheets that you had in your folders. So I'm going to time this now because we do have quite a short amount of time, for 10 minutes for people to do that, at the end of which I'm going to invite everybody to spend 5 minutes just walking from one board to the next to see what's there, and then, if it's all right with our key speakers, when you've seen what's there, you may have your own responses to what people have put on under those 3 headings, and we'll invite you each in turn to offer your responses. Okay, thank you.
As I understood from colonizing, I might be wrong, it might be the complete opposite.
But when it comes to any one of us in this room could have done it as well. So actually, within your structure program, and we can have a little communication with that.
What, a typing community? Yeah, I think so. Or you can, I don't think.
Okay, thank you. So for the next 5 minutes, some of you may be still continuing to write and to put something on one of the boards or to keep it to yourself, whatever. But I'm going to invite everybody to have a look at what's been placed there so far. And then we'll invite our key speakers to respond to some of what they do. Okay, so I'm not quite sure how this is going to work, because there's a lot of us all crowded around. Because at the moment, nobody wants to say anything about norms as hubris. Yeah, maybe we can bring the board forward.
was written.
Okay, thank you everybody. So if I can invite you to take your seats again, please. I agree.
Okay, thank you. So now I'm going to invite each of our panel to say a few words in response to what they've read in experience. Thank you. I have no idea which one you would like to go in. Vanessa? I was going to say, maybe speak when you feel ready to speak.
Yeah.
Maybe you're ready to speak first.
I made some notes, so I don't mind going first. Though I should say, that my remarks are very general or theoretical. There's a lot of the comments on the board were very, very specific. So I'm not really addressing it at that level. But I think these remarks do speak to your project concept note. One set of remarks, which actually connect quite nicely with my talk, are about dialogue. The notion of openness to dialogue with others as equals as part of the decolonizing idea. And as some of you will be aware, dialogue is actually a foundational idea of multiculturalism. You know, what we call multiculturalism as a political theory, founded in the works of people like Charles Taylor and D.P. Park. And I would say that it connects with what I was arguing about the importance of recognition, and in particular, if you like, the first step of correcting misrecognition. because you correct misrecognition by listening to others, and in particular listening to those who have been racialized, had ascribed identities put upon them, and have been silent or marginal. And then the dialogue can develop as an inclusive process. That is to say, dialogue itself is inclusive, because there are forms of speech which do the opposite. You threaten people, you push people away. But dialogue should be understood as something that brings people together, that makes the difference. I think it's very important that there should be space for contesting the terms of the dialogue. No one party to the dialogue should be able to define what the dialogue is or what is correct or appropriate dialogue. There will be ideas about correct or appropriate dialogue, because I don't think otherwise the dialogue will go very far. But those ideas will always be in motion. They'll be criticized, reformed, criticized again. People will respond and so on. So that's what I mean by contesting the terms of dialogue. It's not done once and for all. It's not like we first define the terms of the dialogue and then we have the dialogue. It's not like that. Defining the terms of the dialogue is part of the vitality and the, what we might call the ethical power of the dialogue. And finally, I think dialogue reaches its kind of highest level, possibly its goal. And when I say reaches it, I mean potentially. I'm not saying it always reaches it. Our experience is normally the other way around. It doesn't reach it. But it actually, I think, reaches it when we're able to remake our relationship. So it's not that just a cognitive thing that we listen to each other, maybe there's been some mutual learning, but we now have a new relationship. We have remade our sense of we. So that was one set of remarks in relation to dialogue. I've got briefly also another set of remarks which relates to actually turning round something you've got to frame here. So, but I may have misunderstood you, but I understand one of your concerns is how can hubristic, norms-led thinking become more ethical decolonizing? Well, that's good, of course. But I'd also, well, here's a comment about the other way around. How and when, as it were, good decolonizing thinking become potentially hubristic, because I think that's actually now part of our global problem. I think that will be a 21st century issue. Because after something like 500 years, power is now shifting back to where it normally belonged, which is in Asia and Middle East. The European power hegemony has really been quite historically exceptional. Of course, we now also have North America and so on. So we're going to have a much more multipolar world. I think that's clear when we see the rise of China and India. And so one question that raises is, what happens when a certain subaltern decolonizing nationalism becomes a domineering imperial nationalism? There must be a point when the subaltern is no longer the subaltern. Are China and India going to be subaltern throughout the 21st century? Doesn't look like it. And yet they're extremely nationalist countries. We think America and Trump, make America great again, say nationalistic. But Trumpian nationalism is not that dissimilar from, and possibly an inferior version of, Chinese nationalism and the nationalism represented by the Prime Minister of India, Modi, the kind of Hindu majoritarian nationalism. So I think we have to think about that. And relatedly and finally, I heard the scholar of subaltern studies, historian Dipesh Chakrabarty, who got a very big, mega kind of grant job at University of Chicago. He asked this question, which I hadn't thought about until I heard him ask it a few years ago at a conference. And he said, what will ethically guide countries like India, who are particularly concerned about India, what will ethically guide India when it is powerful? Because when you're powerless and so on, okay, there's a kind of Gandhian philosophy or whatever. But has India got its own indigenous ethical resources that will restrain it so that it's a good power rather than a bad power? So that it will stay, as it were, ethical rather than become hubristic.
I just want to come in here and start from where Tarek, you started on the whole question of dialogue. I think to me the question of dialogue is important, but it's also about the space and the context that makes such dialogue possible. And yesterday in my remark I was making the point that I think for far too long we've had people who speak on behalf of others. And it's very, very important to talk of the authenticated voice which comes from, say, the margins. And that voice needs to be at the table for these conversations to take place. That means we need to deal with issues of power. Right? Who gets to speak? How somebody is taken up and how they are listened to. There's also a question about how that voice translates into action, which means very, very important. Look, we know Bell Hooks talks about coming to voice. And I think to me that coming to voice is about issues about positionality, it's about identity, it's about space in the politics of that voice. If you're going to talk about speaking in the context of decolonization, then certain things to me are very, very clear. One has to do with that courage, the courage to speak. And we all don't have that courage to speak. Sometimes we mess up or liberalize our voice so that it could be accepted. Or sometimes we look for the validation. I think that to me is a concern. I've always insisted that for some of us, we have to continually be a distinctive voice. Be that distinctive voice. It could be a voice of difference, but we need to be that distinctive voice. Then there's also the question of language. If you are having that dialogue, what is the language in which that dialogue is perceived? How do we share that language? How do we share that language? I don't use language simply, I'm talking about it also in terms of the poetics of language. The poetics of language has been very. And of course, the resistance to certain voices. Yes, we may be allowed to speak, but we also have to deal with the resistance, not to all voices, but to certain voices. That when certain voices come, when certain voices are put on the table, there's that resistance to that. And a clear example in my work, sometimes it's particularly around the question of decolonization, when you see the pain and the suffering pitted against fears and anxieties. So the voice that is speaking about pain and suffering is pitted against fears and anxieties. And I think that to me is something that I want to also think about. And the last point, when it's silence, not an option. When it's silence, not an option. And I raise this point, bear in mind that we cannot continue to learn on the backs of certain voices. I know that. But at the same time, we must be aware that silence cannot be an option for some of us.
Right, I think we're carrying back this way, so I'll have a clue now. It's interesting because I'm reminded of the last open session that I participated in, and I can't see the presenter of the last session in the room. But what the presenter did was he put us all in a circle and we had to introduce ourselves. And what that reminded me of is not, and he did that because he wanted to talk about pedagogies that disrupt. Now, for me, that wasn't a pedagogy that disrupts, that's a pedagogy that in terms of who I am as a woman from Tūhoe, is a pedagogy that I'm very familiar with. And in fact, I wouldn't normally expect to engage in conversation until I'd engaged in forming that relationship. And so important is the relational context from which speaking can come. And in fact, the agenda comes out of that relationship as well. And that is the way we do it. That is normal. That is, for us as Māori, that is the way we would start any ritual of encounter where speaking was going to be a part of it. And that is a practice, dare I say it, which we've made normal in the professional development in secondary schools. And so for the first time when we did that, you have people going, who are very, very uncomfortable going through that process for the first time. But after you've introduced them with that practice of not talking about what they are, but who they are, after a few times engaging in that conversation, disrupting, I guess, the fact that they could sit behind their tables and take the notes that they choose to take and walk out at the end of the day. It's so incredibly fast they get to the point where they understand that they like that. They like to be able to tell people who they are, and they like the fact that they are able to have their voice. So I guess the piece I took from that chart was around epistemology and ontology, and the question I would ask is whose and how does that play out? And I guess one of the things for me is that there's a strong connect to ethics as normativity, because again I'd ask that question, who's normal? And how do we disrupt, how do we decolonize the normativity so that we open ourselves up to other ways of understanding and being in the world? Just to connect back to this notion of speaking, because for me that is so important. Yes, it relates to whose voice, but it also relates to whose language. And where does that language come from? Because language has been very important for me as somebody who remembers the time when her older brother was collected from school and brought home. I remember that because I was the toddler that went with my mother to collect my older brother, who was sent home. Years later, I was to learn to speak English, to learn to engage in English. And from that point forward, our parents never spoke Māori in the home. And I had to, in fact, having two native speakers of the language, go to university to start to learn the language again. So what's important about that is that I've only recently come to understand the solutions or the ways of understanding and viewing the world that are within the language that can provide us with new solutions for the future. And for me, that's been incredibly important. There was a reason why colonisation took away languages and replaced it with their own language. And I think that one of the connection back to norms as hubris, there are other solutions out there. And it's about finding the solutions, which may be through the languages, it may be through what we call tikanga, which probably the closest term to that is norms. But tikanga are the principles and the practices that my worldview believes are the right pathway forward. So I find the interrelationship between the three things as really important, and I can't talk about either one of them as separate, but I can certainly talk, or I can certainly make the connections as I understand them through not the colonised worldview that I had to learn, but through the pre-colonial worldview that I've managed to recapture and re-understand as a place for solutions and as a place for going forward.
Okay. So what I felt with the three different reports is that there are different perceptions of what normativity is and what it can do. And some people perceive normativity as something that colonizes, others perceive it as something that can be colonized. So we need, there are differences in the room that have not been probably distinguished or articulated that might be useful to discuss further. And the responses also, the way that I'm reading, and I might have misinterpreted everything too, is that there is an angle of international politics that we can address the questions that have been put on the board. There's an angle of the politics of representation and recognition in the liberation. There's an angle of the politics of relationality and pedagogy. And I would like to add my angle of the politics of desires, intelligibility, and existence, which are a little bit different from this. I've been described recently as somebody who does sociology of knowledge and desire production. And maybe I thought, I don't know, but maybe that's true. So I'll respond with a poem. It's not a poem, it's a story, really. And it's called Research Report, Boxes. I will ask for your permission to read the story. Thank you. So, Research Report, Boxes. There was this time, Space Junction, when I was born on a blue planet in a period of great turmoil. I was born a human being, a wombed, brown-skinned one, in a crisscross of different DNA, of human bloodlines in conflict, which was really confusing at times. Something really interesting was happening with humans in that period. In an act of rebellion against time and death, humans have become obsessed with meaning. They have got attached to the extravagant idea of controlling the world through categories of belief, like dividing the world into pieces and putting these pieces in boxes. The boxes were then organized hierarchically in imposed orders of importance. The main box idea was that all relations should happen through the boxes. Very peculiar. The boxes worked like box houses, box borders, box discipline. They justified expropriation in the name of progress and development. They justified theft and murder in the name of law and order. They justified rankings of the value of life in the name of civilization. They justified the dismemberment of the collective body in the name of individualism. In this period, humans understood well as the decorations of the house. They started to fail to notice that the walls that they had built to protect the accumulated junk trapped them in the abject poverty of the emptiness of separation. Humans forgot how to experience the world, how to dream and to hope, beyond the walls of their houses and borders. You need to understand that it worked like a spell that scaled up their minds and shrank their bodies. Most of them came to believe they could not live without boxes and walls, and stepping outside of the box house, the box border, or the box head became a terrifying idea. When they could not deny the leakage in the ceiling of their box houses, when they could not deny the mold in the walls, when they sensed that the foundation of the house was giving in, when they felt their security shaken, the most tragic thing would happen. They would start wars, defending the freedom of choice, to remain within their box houses in the name of property, to protect their box borders in the name of sovereignty, to uphold the superiority of their box heads in the name of pride. The planet looked at the situation pitifully. She offered them life, but at no other time they had less reverence for it. She was concerned that humans were trashing precisely what sustained their existence, and it was happening very quickly. She tried to tell them. She asked rivers to yell, mountains to shout, winds to howl, clouds to roar, the usual thing. But most humans could no longer listen. The walls of the box house were far too thick, soundproof, and those who got the message were labeled insane and not taken seriously. The trees were rolling their eyes, saying, The story of fetching the house from the inside went on for the longest time and repeated itself time and time again until something happened. Some humans noticed that they could fit through the cracks. However, they were warned that if they stepped outside, they would not be able to get back in. This deterred them for a while, but eventually a few got bored with repeated cycles of separation and let their yearning for wholeness gradually outweigh their fears. At that point, they learned that it was safe, perhaps even safer than in the house, to feel the soil, to breathe the air as extensions of their bodies. They remembered how to listen, how to pace, how to feel, how to scale up, all senses again, and to use boxes in a very different way. They learned that the boxes were also cool, but not for the reasons that they had previously thought. When the weather was too hot or too cold, they offered temporary shelter. Temporary shelter. That was it. So they started to build healthier houses, not made to last very long. This forced them not to forget the joys of working, playing, connecting, and making love and life outside, in the sun, the moon, and the stars.
Thank you very much, Luke, for responding like that. I just want to take a few moments to thank everybody that's been here, particularly our keynote speakers, Mary Berryman, Eric Madu, Anita Andriot, George Day, for their very inspiring and challenging talks, for sharing these ideas with us, and also for their generosity in giving up their time to come and spend this weekend with us, which involved in many cases traveling very long distances. So we are extremely appreciative of that. Thank you very much. We have a small gift for you for Sweden there. Thank you very much. Our workshop conveners for their help. Mahmoudi Salah, Eileen Swanson, Rob Bowden, Shawnee Heat, Diane Leader, and Robert DeCarter for their thought-provoking sessions, which drew on their own professional experience to push our thinking into areas which we might not otherwise have explored. Your efforts in this regard are very much appreciated. Thank you. Colleagues who have helped organize and manage the research strand of this event and the collage table. These are Manel Savar, Helen Griffiths, Sarah Che, and Chris Turner. If you haven't already met them, do you want to just show yourselves again? My two colleagues, Fran and Fatima, for inspiring this event in the first place, and their tireless work putting it together in a very short space of time, which was quite an incredible thing to achieve. So thank you very much. And last but not least, to all the participants who've engaged with this and been here for the 2 days, even if you've come for 1 day or for a period of time, for engaging with challenging and difficult topics and contributing to what turned out to be a really interesting collection of discussions, which were an absolutely crucial part of this event, which was taking place last week. So thank you to everybody that's come here to be with us. Now, before we all go, I just wanted to remind you that we are using your voices, and some of you have given consent for us to use your voices in the research we're doing about this event. If you've made a collage and you don't want us to use your collage, please will you put a sticky note on it with a cross. If you'd still like to make a collage, even if you haven't written a consent form, then please write a consent form for us, and you can still make a collage yourself if you'd like to. We'd also like to use the sticky notes that you've put up here. So if you would like us not to use your particular comment, please take it down before you go. If it's on the board, we will use them in our analysis of what we just saw. Well, everyone, thank you again, and safe travels on your way home. Sorry, just before you go. Several people have asked us how, there may be things that have been generated here and we would like to keep in touch. We're going to send to all participants an email in a few days with further information, and also requesting that if you would like to keep in touch, then just reply to that email, say maybe in what capacity you might like to keep in touch. And hopefully this isn't going to be the end, this is supposed to be the beginning of something that carries on between us. Thanks.
Might it be possible with that email, is some of that experience I've had and others throughout have, you talk to lots of people and think, oh, you don't get an email and stuff, where there might be either an opt-in or an opt-out on the email where we could share. I mean, obviously there's data protection, some people might not wish to share their widely, but those who don't mind. And I certainly heard lots of people haven't actually somewhere on yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can invite people to say whether they would be happy for their emails to be shared or not. And we are also going to create an area. We're not quite sure what form it's going to take yet, but all of the keynotes have been recorded, and we are gathering PowerPoints that have been used. So those will be at some point available to you to have a look at and to engage with again. Yeah. Oh, so we've been one. Yeah, okay. And final thing. If you have written on your reflective sheets that were part of your thing and you are happy for us to use those comments, we've placed a box on the registration table. If you would be so good as to pop that in the box on your way out, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Can you send an e-version of that?
Yes.
Good idea.
Oh, yes, I can. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm with you. Yeah.
So shall we send that out to everybody again?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.